Okay, hello everyone, and welcome. My name is John Harkins. I am the Events Associate for the French American Chamber of Commerce New York chapter. The French American Chamber of Commerce New York chapter is happy to welcome you to today's session, The Impact of COVID-19 on Sustainable Brands. Just a quick word about our organization for any new participants here. The French American Chamber of Commerce's mission is to provide the networks and opportunities, experiences, and understanding that empower successful business relationships between and for members. Through international training programs for younger professionals, trade services, and networking opportunities, we foster the development of individuals and companies. The FACC New York chapter is part of a larger national network of 18 regional chapters and counts a mosaic of 1,000 members representing sectors such as tech, luxury, food, finance, and other professional services. In addition, members have complimentary access to webinars featuring top industry experts and leaders, as well as personalized member-to-member introductions, and of course, access to the FACC member directory. Now, just before we begin fully, a couple housekeeping things to take care of for everyone. This webinar will last about an hour with 40 minutes of presentation with room for questions and answers at the end. As attendees, you can type questions while the presentation is underway. Please, I implore you to make full use of this as we will use those questions for the Q&A session at the end. I would also like to mention that you will receive a copy of the slides as well as a link to download the recording, so don't worry about missing anything. And in addition, at the end of this webinar, members will receive a link to view other member attendees and connect from there. Now to the main events. Today we are speaking on the topic of sustainability with a special focus on how this current COVID-19 crisis is affecting sustainable brands. As the current crisis has turned normal operations upside down, the prospect of maintaining a sustainable and responsible business model has become uncertain. To further understand what this current crisis has meant for sustainable brands and to explore the role these brands can play going forward, we will be speaking to Amy Hall, the VP and Director of Social Consciousness at Eileen Fisher. Amy has been working to shape Eileen Fisher's Social Consciousness department for over 25 years, focusing on honoring the company's values of human rights, serving the environment, and supporting women and girls initiatives. Amy holds an MBA in Sustainable Business, an MA in TSOL and Applied Linguistics, and a BA in Chinese Language. Just before I hand it over to our wonderful main speaker, Amy, I would also like to introduce the chair of the FACC New York Sustainability and Innovation Committee, Skip Rankin, who is a partner at Baker McKenzie and has dedicated a large portion of his career advising clients on renewable energy projects and other sustainability-centric missions. Skip will be providing some opening remarks on the Sustainability and Innovation Committee itself. So without further ado, I will let Skip begin and then pass it on over to Amy. Skip?
Thank you, John. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect, thank you.
Good. Welcome, everybody. And I just wanted to say a few words of welcome on behalf of the Sustainability and Innovation Committee. As many of our members probably recall, we were supposed to have our second annual forum on Tuesday this week. Obviously, events overcame us, but we are planning to have that forum in the fall as soon as we're able to gather together. And I just wanted our members to know that as well. And then in addition to that, because we believe the mission of our committee is so important, particularly in today's world, we'll be bringing you certain webinars over the coming weeks. And we're so pleased to start off with today's webinar. A member of our committee, Amy, who will be advising us on the impact of COVID-19 on sustainable brands. But nothing could please me more than the week of also Earth Day, which was Wednesday, for us to be out in front of our members, and we're going to continue to interact with you in the weeks and months ahead. And so I'll pause there, and then Amy, great to have you with us today. Thank you so much for being available, and I'll turn over the program to you.
All right, thank you. Should I take it away?
Let's do it.
Okay. So hi, everybody, and thanks for tuning in. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about Eileen Fisher, particularly anybody who is calling in or connecting in from overseas who might not be familiar with us. We do have some stores in London, but that's as far as we get in terms of Europe. So we are a US women's clothing company. We're based here in New York. And we've been around since 1984, so we're in our 36th, 37th year now. What we're well known for is very simple, comfortable shapes that work in a system. And we've developed a reputation over the years for our commitment to environmental sustainability, human rights, and women, as John said. A couple of things that are unusual about us: we are 40% employee owned. We are also a certified B Corporation and a New York State benefit corporation. So we're not publicly traded. We have been, very independently operated all of these years. And as a result, we have the good fortune to be fairly flexible and innovative in what we try. A lot of brands come to us to learn what we're doing, or to just hear about what we're doing to inform their own work. So we have a kind of interesting position in this industry. And that said, the COVID-19 pandemic has definitely impacted us. So I think we can go to the next slide. This is a statement that's on our website right now that really points to how we have been on this journey around sustainability primarily, and we have been learning a lot. Many of the goals that we had set for 2020, we were able to achieve, and some we were not able to achieve. And what we are now recognizing is this is an incredibly urgent time. COVID-19, of course, has made it even more so. While we want to remain true to our sustainability goals, we really have to step things up, and we have to rethink what we're doing and where we're headed and how we're going to get there. If you want to click, John. So the climate crisis demands urgent action. If not now, when? And I will say this statement was written probably 4 months ago, and yet it feels even more appropriate now than it did when we first wrote it. So go ahead. This is Eileen Fisher, and she has been, she's our co-CEO. A couple of things, she's been talking to the press quite a lot recently. There have been some articles this week talking about how we are now faced as a company with way too much inventory. All of our stores closed. We had to close our stores by the end of March, a little bit before the end of March. By the way, we have 60 stores around this country and Canada and the UK. We are also carried in all the major department stores, and we have a website presence. So without our stores and without the department stores selling our clothes, we have very little business going on, which is probably true for many of you. So we have a lot of inventory building up. We have very little income coming in. And as a result, we've had to make some very, very difficult decisions. We've had to furlough the majority of our employees. And we are just trying to make sure that we can come through this situation without further damage to the business. One thing that Eileen said earlier in this pandemic to our own staff was, the planet is telling us to stop and slow down, to be more vigilant about what we produce, asking us, what do we need to do to simplify now? And then just this week in Vogue, on Vogue.com, she said, the best thing we can do is reduce consumption, reduce production. So as we move forward for ourselves, I think the big question is, how do we rethink what we need to do to not only survive, but to thrive in this new reality that's facing us? Go ahead. So this is a beautiful phrase that Paul Hawken, who's a well-known environmentalist and writer, I paraphrased it a little bit, but he said this with regard to climate change in general, and I think it fits beautifully here. This isn't happening to us, it's happening for us. So how do we think about the opportunity rather than the calamity of what's going on right now? I also recently heard somebody say that this pandemic is what will allow the human species to survive. Without the pandemic, we would one day perish just from the climate crisis alone. So this forced slowdown will allow us as a species to have a fighting chance to live for more generations to come. But there's a big tension facing us. We want to get back to normal for sure. We want to get back to work. We want our children to get back to school. We want our businesses to recover. But what is normal, right? And maybe normal, the way we used to think about it, isn't actually good enough. We want our livelihoods back. But how much stuff do we actually need? And how much money do we actually need? I bet most of us on this phone call are not spending as much money as we had been prior to this pandemic. And I'll bet most of us, well, we don't have a choice, most of us, but we're not as busy, we're not running around. Although it can get a little boring, there's something about it that feels a little bit refreshing. Is there something about this that we can maintain that will allow us to think differently going forward? So I'm going to put out some proposition to you guys. This is not me saying this is what business needs to do, but I'm going to make some suggestions. So we'll move to the next slide. I have 3 likelihoods and 4 questions that I hope will draw us into conversation, because I feel I'm just a message bearer here. So we'll go on one more click. So with the 3 likelihoods, I mean, the first one comes from the news. We should all be planning for a 20 to 35% decrease in size and sales. The economy will surely be smaller than it is now. I would say unless you represent a big box retailer, you are likely to come through this needing to resize your company. People will not have a lot of spare cash. Even no matter what, they're going to be more careful with their money. Eileen Fisher is already planning to be smaller and to have lower revenues. What does this look like for your company? People will be searching for meaning and connection. I think this is probably obvious, but it's worth focusing on. Like, what does that actually mean? After the pandemic starts to lift and we can start venturing out, we're going to be very tentative about it. You know, when I go to the grocery store right now, I look around, I run in, I'm covered up, I grab what I need and I leave as fast as I can. There's a real sense of fear and uncertainty when I go in, and everybody is afraid of everybody else. I don't think we're going to be able to shake that fear off very quickly. So what does that say about our social norms? For those in the States, you may have heard several days ago, the head of the infectious disease specialist from the Center for what's it called? CDC, Anthony Fauci was suggesting, I think a little bit flippantly, but it's very provocative. What if we no longer shake hands? What if we find a different way to greet each other? We may have to rethink our norms, but our personal need for connection will not change. So how do we connect with each other, and what is business's role in facilitating that connection? How can we inject meaning into our products and services, since every purchase will be much more carefully considered. People aren't going to be spending as much, as I said. Back in 2001, right after the Twin Towers fell during our 9/11 incident here in the States, Eileen Fisher became a hub for connectivity. People were coming into our stores not to shop, but they were coming in for emotional support, to share their experience with somebody who would listen, to get a cup of water, to take a deep breath, to rest if they had been walking for a long distance, to get away from the destruction. What will this look like for us in the post-COVID world? Can your business be a hub for connection? Can you take a pause and have it not be all about selling, 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 but creating a safe space for people? And if we truly slow down, the climate will thank us, and it already has. We've all seen those early photos of China, right? Without transportation and industrial pollution. The same is happening in India and Brazil and many other places around the globe as people have slowed down. I read a statistic that suggested that in those moments, there's been 22% pollution recorded. It's too bad we've had to force this slowing down. But what if we reassess our daily lives? Reflect on how it was for us when we were young, when we were growing up a generation ago. We didn't run around a lot. We made time for hobbies. We made time for connection with family. We played games. We talked to people. I mean, these are, you know, why do we have to keep pace the way we have been up to this point? So those are the three likelihoods: plan for a decrease, search for meaning, and slow down. So let's move on to the 4 questions, which are really for you to think about. First one, how big is big enough? And when I say big, I'm talking about the actual business size, talking about profits, talking about how much consumption, and I'm talking about how much waste. Paul Hawken, the same person I quoted earlier, said, "We have an economy that tells us it's cheaper to destroy the earth in real time rather than renew, restore, and sustain it. It's cheaper to destroy rather than to restore because our economy makes it that way. How do we make it economically viable to live in balance with the earth?" And if we all, you know, think about, oh, that's the legislator's problem, that's a politician's problem, we have a voice. We can use our voice to make that kind of change happen, to provide incentives, to make it more appealing to restore the earth than to destroy it. What is the future we want for ourselves and for the planet? You know, going back to that early and infamous statement that Gandhi made, be the change you want to see in the world. Each of us has a vision for the planet we want for ourselves, for our children, and for our future generations. What does that look like? Does it contain plastic? Does it rely on mined resources? Does it have a diversity of animal and plant species? Does it have clean water and air? All of these kinds of things. We can do everything possible to make that future vision a reality. Why wait? It doesn't make sense to wait. So with that in mind, what is one change I can make now to prepare for that emerging future? Is there a change to my business model? I think that's a big question. This is the time to think about that. Is there a new product I should be offering that might be different? Are there fewer products I should be offering? Maybe I'm just making too much. Should I be using different materials? Should I be thinking differently about my supply chain? At Eileen Fisher, we're thinking about all of these questions for sure. We're definitely thinking about fewer product, which will, of course, require us to rethink our supply chain to some extent. We're thinking about how to accelerate our shift to regenerative agriculture, which will have a positive impact on biodiversity and on carbon drawdown, et cetera. So what does this look like for your business? How can I strive for net positive impact rather than just doing less bad? And what I mean by that is many of us who have taken an active stance on environmental sustainability and human rights have adopted any number of different initiatives where we are measuring and checking off and measuring and checking off. How much carbon am I using this year versus last year? How much waste did I generate this year versus last year? What are the wages I've been paying this year versus last year? That's all excellent and important work, but it doesn't tell us about our actual impact on the earth and on the people. What is the material difference I'm making through my business model on the health of this planet? How can we reimagine a system whereby net positive impact is actually known and visible to all of us? And what's my role in that new world? Let's move on. And my dog has come for a visit. I have to push her back. Go, go, go. I want to read a poem. It's very short that I love, and I feel it really speaks to this moment in our time. It's called Hieroglyphic Stairway, and I first ran across this poem when I took a training offered by the Pachamama Alliance. It's an online training by the Pachamama Alliance. So here we go. It's 3:23 in the morning and I'm awake because my great-great-grandchildren won't let me sleep. My great-great-grandchildren ask me in dreams, what did you do while the planet was plundered? What did you do when the earth was unraveling? Surely you did something when the seasons started failing, as the mammals, reptiles, and birds were all dying. Did you fill the streets with protest when democracy was stolen? What did you do once you knew? So therein is the ultimate question. We can't unknow what we now know. We can't just flip a switch and return to the way things were. So with this new knowledge, what are the changes we are going to actively make and not wait for somebody else to do first? We can be the first movers. So move to the last slide. Okay. And I just ask, this is a moment to open it up to questions and conversation. I know this wasn't 40 minutes by any stretch of the imagination, but we'll see how long, what's coming up for you. And I love this image of prairie dogs because they are very much engaged in community and they are popping up and down. So, so let's open it up.
Sure thing. Thank you, Amy. Yes, let's please open it up. So the first question we have coming is Eileen Fisher changing their business model going forward?
That's an excellent question. We are discussing everything. Anything is possible. We already have a thriving circular product part of our company where we take back our clothes and we resell them or we repurpose them into new product. And I would say that that's one piece of our business that will not change and probably will grow, will continue to grow because it doesn't rely on virgin resources. It just takes back our old product and uses it again. What we are rethinking right now is how much new product should we be making? We're definitely not going to make as much as we currently do. How often should we be introducing new collections? Right now, like many other brands, we introduce a new collection every single month. And we're wondering if that's actually the right cadence. And I think we're willing to buck the trend a little bit, try to nudge the system and maybe stretch that out. How did we get to a place where we feel like people need new clothes every single month? It doesn't make sense. And that started to shift back in the 50s. So, you know, we're well into this. I think we may have hit a, you know, that, what's the word? Like hit the ceiling. We maxed it out. So if we rein it in, I think we're willing to directly ask ourselves how big is big enough, and maybe we don't need to be as big as we are. And let's be the right size for where we are now and this emerging future in the world.
Just you mentioned understanding the right size. Could you, from your position, see any other major companies who are making that decision and, you know, actively trying to figure that out as well?
Well, that's an interesting question. So first of all, I wonder, I'm going to just ask another question back. I'm really good just asking questions. Who's going to survive this? I think it remains to be seen how many businesses are going to file for bankruptcy. We've heard already, I haven't seen evidence that it's happened, but we heard, for example, that Neiman Marcus is on the verge of filing for bankruptcy. They're such a well-established brand. I wonder how many others will not be able to survive these few months of very little to no business. So first, that's the first question. And for those who do survive, I think that they're not going to have any choice but to shrink because people will not be out there shopping as much. So, and in the same breath, I've heard of some very well-known big brand conglomerates, I'm not going to name any, who expect to return fully to business as usual. And that truly scares me. I feel like they're not recognizing the inevitable changes that are happening, not just in our society in this country, but all around the world. Also for suppliers who may not be able to fulfill the number of orders. They have vulnerable populations working for them who may be severely affected by COVID-19. They may not be able to find as many workers going forward. They may have to change their own practices to maintain distance, to keep people safe, etc. So there are many, many levels to this resizing and reshaping. So to answer your question, I don't know specifically of other brands that are resizing, but I think that I would be surprised if there is a brand that's not discussing that right now.
Okay. Shifting towards more proactive and positive side, what opportunities do you see, and what industries do you think will thrive by rethinking everything due to the crisis?
Well, I have heard an awful lot that anybody who's involved in sustainability or who has made a commitment to sustainable practices and sustainable product will be in a good place, because that search for meaning that I mentioned is going to be really important going forward. People will want to be able to find products that don't just serve their own needs, but serve a greater need beyond them. So that would be true for clothing, everyday household items, food, definitely food, pretty much any kind of product that you can see out there. Where I think we might be missing the boat will be in the big box, low price big box chains, because there's a certain slice of the population that will only be able to afford, the cheapest items, and may not be able to, out of necessity, care about all of these other values, sustainability values in particular. So, you know, the big box retailers may not put as much emphasis on these values. I keep hearing little whisperings, though, that Amazon, for example, may be rethinking its business model and its size. So if they can reconfigure, rejigger, then anybody can.
Okay. And just getting more on the clothing aspect of things, would you be able to speak to what Eileen Fisher is going to do, or how they're going to handle any unsold inventory?
Yes, it's happening already. We're sitting on a lot of inventory that should have been in our stores right now for spring. And so we're, first of all, offering it at a very steep discount on our website. And whatever we are not able to sell, probably some of it will go into our Renew business, meaning it will get funneled into that business for sale once the Renew stores open up. So there's a way to capture that clothing, but that won't be all of it. And we're also looking at donations. So how can we find communities in need that can use our clothing? One thing we never do, we never burn clothing, we never throw it away, and we don't donate it to just random charities where we don't know who the end receiver is. So we're very committed to moving it responsibly as much as possible. Right.
Okay. Naturally, sustainability moves up and down the supply chain. Would you be able to speak to how Eileen Fisher is supporting supply chain partners during this crisis?
Well, the only way that we have been able to support supply chain partners is simply by trying to spread out the production that we do have going across the supply chain and not pull orders away or leave suppliers out in the cold. There has been a reduction in our manufacturing because we don't have any place to sell it. But anything that we had already committed to is staying in production, and where we can, we've just been spreading it out. There's been a lot of calls for brands to provide, for example, funding to supply chain workers, make sure that workers are receiving their regular pay. And the truth of the matter is, we ourselves as a company, as I mentioned in the beginning of my presentation, a big majority of our own company is furloughed, which means we can't even afford to keep a majority of our own team on the payroll right now, although they are receiving benefits. So, our first priority is to the health of our company, and if we can get it, if we can eke it out, then we can do more for our supply chain. So we're just maintaining the orders that we can with our supply chain as best we can right now.
Sure. And now, as a company executive, as yourself, who or what sources are you currently turning to guidance to inform these decisions going forward as times are increasingly uncertain?
Oh, that's such an excellent question. One of our key partners through this has been the B Corporation community. And I have to say, it was an unexpected benefit of being a B Corporation. We originally had reached out to the B Lab, which is the overseeing organization to the B Corp community. We had reached out to B Lab to see if they knew of any resources that could help us access loans or other, financial or human resources instruments just to help maintain the integrity of our employee population, et cetera. And they were very generous with their time. The leadership of B Lab has connected in with our leaders, our co-CEOs. We have Eileen and John C. are our two co-CEOs, and have connected them to, I think, some B Corporation financial organizations to offer some help. So, you know, that's the one thing I'll say that's really wonderful about the B Corp community is we really do lean on each other and try to support each other through thick and thin.
You had mentioned the word surviving a couple different times. So for some industries, sustainable practices can translate into higher costs or require an upfront investment before seeing long-term savings. With all companies concerned about their bottom line and surviving, are you afraid from your position many will temporarily sacrifice unsustainable practices, or they will sacrifice sustainable practices to ensure their profits and cash flow and ultimate survival?
I am concerned about that, and I think it's a real possibility that that will happen for some companies. I know that over the years, you know, I've seen when other companies have lost profitability, oftentimes the first team to go is the CSR team, the social responsibility team or sustainability team. I really hope that companies will recognize the value of this work to their bottom line, that while this may not be the first reason customers come into their stores or go to their website, it will be the reason those customers stay with them and come back to them if they recognize that when they spend money on that company's product, it wasn't just for that product, but it actually was a product with additional values that brought an additional benefit. And of course, the price has to be competitive. And if the company can't achieve that, then that's going to be very challenging for them. In our case, you know, we are not pulling back on our sustainability commitments, but we are probably going to be stretching out some of the goals. We're going to probably have to take a little longer to get to some of the goals that we've set because of the time we're in. We have fewer resources, and we have to be much more focused about how we spend that money. So,
sure. As many companies had to put employees on furlough or let them go entirely, how do you think that trust between company, employee, and ultimate user can be rebuilt for sustainable brands? And would you be able to provide maybe a timeline for what that rebuilding would look like?
Wow, that is such an interesting question. I've been reading a lot of articles about diversity and inclusion and how, of all times, this is not a time to forget or to let diversity and inclusion go away. And the reason I bring that up is inclusion and including employees and being really open and honest with them and being really transparent with them. So if employees understand why these decisions are being made, they are much more likely to support them and to accept them and not to feel bitter. So this is a learning we've had in our own company, and as the weeks have gone on, Eileen and others in the company have become more and more transparent with the rest of us to explain very clearly why these things are happening, why certain people have had to be furloughed, et cetera. So I think that the work begins now. It doesn't begin after the healing starts, right? Once things start to return to whatever normal is, first of all, it's too late to start this relationship healing. But if that's when you're still truly starting it, I would say the evidence is in the action. So it's not enough just to talk. You have to demonstrate through your actions, whether that means you know, bringing more people on, but at a lower level, at 25% or at 50%, rather than bringing a lot of people on at 100%. Being really clear about what the most essential work is, and saying no to some of the things that can wait. I'm sure we're all doing that already anyway. Healing bad feelings in a company, there's the timeline. It can be months, if not a couple of years, before employees will learn to trust again. And so being as open as possible with them as early as possible, for me, is the key. Act as if you have an employee-owned company. You know, ask the employees, what would you do? How would you, where are the dollar savings? What is the work that we need to focus on? What can you willingly say no to right now and still feel good about the work that we're doing to move things forward? And it's not just about employees, but also being as transparent as possible with your customers, with your business partners, and with the general public. All of that, I think, has huge mileage in it.
Right. Just as a last question, I'd like to go a little bit more grand scale. How do you think the luxury industries will react, not being quote unquote essential by nature? Will they be shamed? Will they need to show how they help society move through this?
Wow, that's a great question. First of all, I think that a lot of people who shop luxury are not as affected by this pandemic. So my guess, and I don't know this for sure, is that probably the sales of the luxury brands haven't dropped as much as the sales at some of the other brands. And our company is kind of in between. That said, for some reason, and I don't know why, luxury brands have often escaped the magnifying glass of scrutiny when it comes to sustainability values, human rights values. I'm not aware that customers have, outside of fur and maybe exotic skins, I'm not aware of a lot of attacks that customers have made or the general public has made on luxury brands in the past. So I would imagine that some of that kind of halo effect will carry forth. I do think that luxury brands have a responsibility to be as responsive as possible to the community needs anyway, regardless of what their customers say. It doesn't matter if your customers are asking for this or not. We should all be doing the right thing. We should all be imagining that future scenario that we want, right, for ourselves and our children.
Right.
And if that means using better dyes, better chemistry, not killing animals, whatever the thing is that you can do using much less plastic, that's the direction we should be going in. And you'll just win over even that many more customers going forward. So I kind of feel like the potential for criticism becomes moot if you actually start from a place of caring and doing the right thing.
Okay. Well, I would like to just take a brief minute to thank you so much, Amy, for an incredibly engaging presentation. And I would like to thank all those who attended for your participation. To the attendees, if you are interested in joining the FACC network or need connections or assistance, if you are already a member, feel free to reach out directly to us at membership@FACC-NY.org. As I mentioned, this presentation's recordings and slides will be sent to all participants. And as a reminder, we have an exciting calendar of upcoming webinars next week. We have Breaking into New Markets to Fight Economic Slowdown on the 28th. We have Managing Relief through COVID-19 on the 29th. And the beginning of our lunchtime series, Tasting Through France, on the 30th. So Amy, thank you once more. Very much appreciate you taking the time to answer all the questions and to go through some great insight into how you think things are going. To all the attendees, have a lovely rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.